Good evening to our distinguished guests, panelists, and those viewing virtually. You'll excuse me for continuing to wear a mask, but we are in a New Jersey school building and it is necessary for me to keep my mask on. We welcome you to the 2022 Youth Bias Task Force Roundtable. As you can see, we should have a screen with a slide. Despite our awareness and activism to battle bias, these acts of bias and related crimes continue. Bias against a person because of what they look like, how they worship, whom they love, are learned behaviors, and such behaviors can be unlearned. Thus, to identify the root causes of hate and bias among young people in New Jersey, we must answer the following questions. Where are young people learning and internalizing bias beliefs? And once they have learned and internalized those beliefs, what influences and to what degree do they act on them? Our panelists tonight will speak on a variety of topics, including but not limited to addressing harassment, intimidation, and bullying in schools, led by Kyle Anderson, the County Interim Superintendent of Schools here in Middlesex County. Also, we have
Recommendation 11, encourage people in private post-secondary institutions to hire or designate a chief equity officer, is directed at post-secondary institutions. 12, ensure the juveniles in state custody receive the same anti-bias programming as students in other schools, lies with the Juvenile Justice Commission. Recommendation 13, publish resources for schools, colleges, and universities responding to a bias incident. DCR and its partner agencies have been meeting regularly and are in the process of drafting this guidance. We expect to publish it within the year. Recommendation 14, improve EUCR bias incident data collection and public access to data. The New Jersey State Police began reporting bias data on the monthly basis in April of 2021. The monthly posting consists of year-to-date data and are available on New Jersey State Police's website. NJSP also published a primary bias incident report for 2020 on March 30th, 2021. A final bias incident report for 2020 should be published this year. Recommendation 15, make it easier for New Jersey residents to report bias incidents to the Attorney General's office. Division on Civil Rights launched the New Jersey Bias Investigation Access System, which is a reporting portal. You can access, it's an online portal through which complaints of discrimination and bias-based harassments can be filed with the division. And reports of bias incidents can be reported to the Division of Criminal Justice on the same portal. The portal is also available in English and Spanish, and it does provide a handbook for those that are filing with Division on Civil Rights. Since its launch, DCR has worked with over 3,000 community members to publicize the portal, translated documents to increase access to the portal, and is attending community events to disseminate information and resources. The Division of Criminal Justice is also promoting the material. For those of you that are here in person, you found a postcard on your seat. That postcard has Division on Civil Rights contact information, and when you flip it over, it tells you how to file a complaint on NJ bias. Recommendation 16, stay strong, we're almost there. Continue aggressive criminal and civil enforcement of NJ bias laws. Although we cannot publicly discuss specifics over pending investigations, Division on Civil Rights is actively investigating complaints of discrimination, harassment filed with our office, and has opened director-initiated complaints into possible systemic civil rights violations. Recommendation 17, strengthen state hate crime law. This falls with the Division of Criminal Justice. Recommendation 18, strengthen civil and criminal remedies available to victims of bias-motivated conduct. This is directed to the legislator, who are responsible for this recommendation. Recommendation 19, hold accountable those who weaponize the internet to harm others. This is also directed at the legislation. Recommendation 20, mandate completion of anti-bias education program for juvenile bias crime offenders. This recommendation sits with the Division of Criminal Justice and the Juvenile Justice Commission. Recommendation 21, expand law enforcement training on cyber hate investigations and domestic terrorism. This recommendation is with the Division of Criminal Justice as well as the Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. Recommendation 22, consider investigations related to social media platforms. Although we cannot publicly discuss specifics about pending investigations, the Attorney General's Office and Division on Civil Rights have pursued investigations in which social media platforms were used to facilitate violations of anti-discrimination laws and will continue to consider such investigations when appropriate. Recommendation 23, study potential amendments to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. This is with the Office of the Attorney General. Recommendation 24, call out public figures who use hateful rhetoric. This is directed at public figures in New Jersey. Recommendation 25, launch a statewide campaign to stand up to hate in New Jersey. Division on Civil Rights successfully ran the student competition in early 2021 and announced the winners on April 4th, 2021 during a virtual award ceremony. As part of the competition, young people across New Jersey submitted 20 videos, 75 pieces of original artwork, 20 hashtags, 27 slogans, illustrating how they stand up to bias and prejudice in their communities. Since April, DCR has posted every single piece submitted on social media, and many pieces have been on exhibit in person across the state, including an in-person and virtual 18-piece art exhibit with artworks in Trenton from mid-September to mid-October in 2021, a virtual and in-person exhibit of 44 pieces at Mana Contemporary in Jersey City from mid-November 2021 to mid-December 2021, and currently it sits at Montclair Art Museum from December 20th through March 14th. So I encourage you all to stop by Montclair Art Museum and see these 44 pieces in person. The student artists have been able to attend these events in person or virtually. Students who submitted artwork are also serving as DCR Youth Ambassadors. And to learn more about the Youth Ambassador Program, you're more than welcome to email me at Tisha, Tisha.leonardo, Leonardo, at njcivilrights.gov, NYCIVILRIGHTS.gov. We also have a virtual campaign, which is posted on our website. Division on Civil Rights Community Relations Unit has been running a statewide Stand Up to Hate campaign with pledge cards on social media. If you would like to join us in the Stand Up to Hate campaign, please feel free to reach us at communityrelations@njcivilrights.gov. Through OHSP's Interfaith Advisory Council and with the assistance from Division on Civil Rights, OHSP has personally coordinated partnerships and pledges from religious leaders and institutions via the Stop the Hate campaign. Recommendation 26, implement a plan to establish to establish an incident response team within the Division on Civil Rights. To date, the Community Relations Unit also serves as a crisis response unit has been established with a Community Relations lead mediator starting in November. He will lead responses in communities after civil rights incidents have occurred. And in 2021, the Community Relations Unit planned and attended 98 events, presentations, and speaking opportunities that have reached over 3,500 people. Recommendation 27, create resource guides to educate parents, guardians, and educators about how to talk to children about avoiding hate on the internet and how to recognize signs of radicalization. To implement this recommendation, Division on Civil Rights held 2 community listening sessions in June and July of 2021 on the topic of white supremacy, domestic threats, and youth extremism. We expect to publish a report memorializing these listening sessions this year. You can also find these 2 listening sessions on the DCR website. The live recordings still live there. To answer your last question, Erin, the way that individuals on the local and county level can support the implementations of these recommendations is to, 1, speak to your legislators about the importance of the recommended legislation, specifically Recommendation 1, Recommendation 2, 8, 9, 10, 11, 18, and 19. Plan local dialogues and events within your communities that bring people together to speak on things otherwise we wouldn't hold in public settings, and have a chance to interact and talk about bias. As mentioned in Recommendation 25, when we had the statewide campaign Stand Up to Hate, and as explained in the report, including small local events. You can also report any incidents of bias or hate crime, or discrimination on bias.njcivilrights.gov. You can file on behalf of your child if your child is a minor. And once the guidance documents are published, we encourage you to reshare them within your networks to bring awareness to these published documents, as well as support, reshare, and participate in any and all Youth Bias Task Force related events and programming, i.e. listening sessions, the student competition, or tonight's event. Thank you.
Tisha, thank you so much. Yep, I think I got it. Green means go, right? Thank you so much, Tisha, for that very substantive update on the report's recommendations. And I'd like to thank just DCR has done a tremendous job collaborating with the different agencies. It's been a huge undertaking to get everyone together and coordinate implementing those recommendations. So it's wonderful to hear that some of them have really moved forward in advance, and some are still kind of in the works. But thank you so much for that very substantive update. I did want to ask, is Bill down there? Bill Davis? There he is. So Tisha shared with us that, you know, from a local perspective, and you as a community activist, I'd be interested in your perspective. Tisha said, and encouraged communities to plan local dialogues and interact to talk about bias. What's your perspective on that, or your experience and perceptions in the community about what's already maybe going on with that?
Good evening, everybody. Happy Black History Month. And let me congratulate Tisha and all the people that are here. I think that the report is very comprehensive. There are elements of it that I think and hope are going to be acted on sooner rather than later. And for those of you that didn't read it, right, may not have read it, and I'm going to answer a question in a second, Aaron. One of the things that's in there as an educator is that the Amistad is mentioned. So for those who don't know, Amistad was introduced at least 10 years ago as a way to make sure that all children in New Jersey were educated about the contributions of people of African ancestry. Unfortunately, it has not been consistently implemented. And so when we think about the issues of bias that we're attempting to address, implementation of Amistad would certainly be helpful. The report also cites that 85% of the teachers in New Jersey are white, despite the fact that the student population is significantly students of color. And so I'm hoping that with this interagency effort that we're going to see an effort to make sure that we recruit more teachers of color to the classroom. African-American children are suspended 3 times the rate of white children. And so when we look at the school to prison pipeline, which is also mentioned in the report, we need to figure out a way to make sure that there are more teachers of color so we have fewer students that are recommended to the office that would reduce the number of students that may end up in incarceration. And so there's some elements of this report that I think are well written. As we celebrate African American History Month, one of our great leaders, Martin Luther King, said there is what's called the fierce urgency of now. And so I'm glad to hear that we're moving forward, albeit more slowly than I would like. The last point I want to make, and specifically to Aaron's point, we had 2 current events that reinforce the need for the work that we're doing. I think, and I'd like to just see by show of hands, how many of you saw the video of what took place in Bridgewater earlier this week? I don't know if anybody, and I'm sorry, Joshua, you didn't see it, hopefully you will. 2 kids, 2 teenagers, had a scuffle inside the Bridgewater Mall. One appeared to be African American, one appeared to be white. Cops come, they separate the two. 2 cops get on a little small 14-year-old kid, handcuff him, and arrest him. The kid that appeared to be white is sitting on the couch watching. There's also a case that most of you may not have known about in Plainsboro, in which the Plainsboro police, accompanied by the sheriff's office of Middlesex County, are supposed to be evicting someone and shoot this young African-American male 5 times. First, they put the taser on him and then shoot him 5 times. And so how are people feeling in the community right now? They're feeling really agitated, feeling as though that despite all of the circumstances and investment and conversation that's taking place, we still see police misconduct. And I know that there's an investigation taking place, but my freedom of speech says I'm gonna call it what it is, misconduct. For those of you that don't know, hopefully the family and Ben Crump are going to address that issue, because I think that until there's some consequence for behavior, we're going to continue to see these circumstances take place. And so there's been a lot of different effort. I mean, so when the George Floyd murder took place, all across the country, around the world, people were protesting. And so now that it's kind of calmed down, people aren't protesting as much. But I think these events kind of remind us of the need for change to take place. The last point I want to make is this. If we intend for children to be able to accomplish the goal of being less biased, we have to really think about what we're going to do for the adults. Because children learn a lot of their behavior from adults, whether at home, in school, or in community settings. So I think it's kind of the interrelationship between what happens with children at home, what happens with children in school and in the community. If the adults are not modeling the behavior they want to see children engage in, we need to really think about how we're going to address that. And so I hope, as an educator, as someone who's had the privilege of teaching students, and I've trained staff all over the state of New Jersey, that I've seen some steps forward, but there are a lot more steps to go. And so I'm glad that Dr. Gray is here. Piscataway does have an equity and inclusion staff member. I'm hoping that that will be an example for other school districts in the county to follow, and that we will see more staff in the classroom, right? When I was training school staff across New Jersey, this 85% of teachers being white, I saw that up close all over the state. And so we really do need more teachers of color. We need the Amistad implemented. We do need to make sure that the adults are engendering the ideas of anti-bias that we'd like to see.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your comments. And I appreciate that even though we acknowledge, some steps forward, that we do not rest in our laurels and we continue to move forward to make those changes around achieving race equity. So next, I would like to invite Akeisha Williams, Assistant Prosecutor with the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office, to join us in the conversation and sharing some ideas, and sharing some of the state action taken out of the Attorney General's office. When young people engage in bias incidents and bias crimes, it is critical that the community send them the resounding message that such conduct is unacceptable. It is also critical, however, to implement evidence-based responses that focus on preventing recidivism. Because bias incidents and bias crimes result from learned behavior, anti-bias education is often the most effective response. A key function of the juvenile justice system in New Jersey is to rehabilitate youth and help them enter adulthood less likely to break the law. For the majority of youthful offenders, the system works best when juveniles are diverted away from formal court proceedings and towards social, community, or familial support. Akeisha, can you please share with us how the recent Attorney General's directives serve to address incidents of hate, bias, and prejudice among New Jersey's children and young adults, while encouraging diversion that promotes accountability and advances a child's rehabilitation?
Well, it's a lot. I can say that when we're looking at bias incidents, we also have to look at the Juvenile Justice Reform Directive. So we have an Attorney General Directive on bias investigations and an Attorney General Directive on juvenile justice reform. And we have to try to balance the two of those as best as we can. Or on one hand, we're looking for accountability on bias incidents, but on the other hand, we're also looking for a way to deal with juveniles that is the least harmful to the child themselves. But again, you have to balance that against the interests of the victim who has suffered the affront of being the victim of a bias crime. So let me talk about first the bias investigation directive. When we talk about bias from a law enforcement standpoint, when we hear that there's a bias, something that happened that has a color of bias on it, we have to separate those issues between what we call a bias incident and a bias crime. So anything that involves bias, we'll classify it as a bias incident. Under the directive, it should be reported to the Attorney General's office, it should be reported to police, and then police have to investigate it. And they have to investigate it based upon what's in the directive from the Attorney General's office. And again, we know that juvenile justice reform seeks to do what we can to divert juveniles away from the court system. But when we have situations that are serious, like bias crimes, that are a serious affront to the victim, you have to take them seriously and do what you can to have accountability and comfort for the victim. So when we look at the bias incident investigation directive, it basically indicates that bias incident investigations shall be conducted in a timely fashion using all appropriate resources to rapidly determine the facts and circumstances surrounding each incident. Careful attention should be given to identifying the motive and cause of the bias incident and to identify suspects. Each law enforcement officer must be sensitive to the feelings, needs, and fears that may present in the victims and the community at large as a result of a suspected or confirmed bias incident. So this is an important part because this next part that I'm going to go through are some bullet points that the Attorney General Directive wants law enforcement to take into consideration when handling bias incidents. And this is before we even figure out if it's a bias crime that's involved. Law enforcement agencies handling bias incidents shall first approach the victims in a sensitive and supportive manner. Next, reassure victims that appropriate investigative and enforcement methods will be used by the law enforcement agency to properly address the bias incident. Next, ensure that a thorough and complete initial response and follow-up investigation are conducted as required by the facts and circumstances surrounding the suspect or confirmed bias incident, which includes providing for appropriate community relations activities and crime prevention programs. Refer the victim's witnesses to the appropriate Office of Victim Witness Advocacy or on the Division of Civil Rights where appropriate. Interact with concerned community service organizations, civic groups, and religious institutions regarding the suspected or confirmed bias incident. Effectively calm the victims and reduce their fear and alienation through direct ongoing official communication regarding the bias incident. Notify the Division of Criminal Justice or the Division of State Police and the appropriate county prosecutor's office of all bias incidents detailed, and ensure that the victims and other concerned parties are afforded all the rights and protections provided under the New Jersey Constitutional Amendment for Victims' Rights and the Crime Victims' Bill of Rights. So we all recognize, I mean, everyone here is interested in this topic, and we know how important bias crimes are and how they can affect the victims and have a ripple effect within the community. So we know that it's important to show compassion to the victims and let them know that law enforcement is serious about investigating those cases. But then we have to balance that against the Juvenile Justice Reform Directive's intention to divert as many children away from the criminal justice system with respect to the courts as possible. So when we look at the Juvenile Justice Reform Directive, there are 5 mechanisms that are listed therein that are available to provide police and prosecutors with a way to divert children away from the juvenile justice system. There are curbside warnings, station house adjustments, use of complaint summonses in lieu of complaint warrants, the presumption against pretrial detention, and post-charge diversion by prosecutors. So first, let's talk about the curbside warning. So a curbside warning is an informal action by police. If police are riding down the street on patrol and they see kids maybe throwing rocks at a car or throwing rocks at a window, a curbside warning would be the officer pulling over saying, hey, stop, don't do that. Let me tell you why what you're doing is a crime and you shouldn't do that. But then the police, after having that discussion with the child, they move on. There's no arrest. They're not taking any information from the children. They're just warning them to stop their behavior in situations that are minimal and more disruptive, not necessarily criminal. In the event that someone is damaging property, that would be quasi-criminal as a juvenile issue, but it's more of a cut that out situation for a curbside warning. For a station house adjustment, it's more formal than a curbside warning. These are for situations that are a little more serious where the kids may be involved in committing a crime, but the crimes don't rise to the level of something that we think is appropriate to bring into court. So for example, you have a child that goes to a farm stand and steals like 6 or 7 pumpkins. The person who owns that farm stand says that this kid needs to be talked to. They don't need to go to jail. There's no need to arrest this child. I don't want anything more to happen than for you to talk to the kid and to return my property to me. So in that situation, we would do a station house adjustment where the officer would bring the child and the parents into the police department. There's conditions that the officers can put into a station house adjustment agreement, being to stay out of trouble at school, no additional negative contact with law enforcement, write an apology letter to the victim, and make sure that you have restitution with respect to returning the property or paying for the property that you took or damaged. So something of that sense where there's accountability, there's a written memorialized document where the juvenile is acknowledging what they did wrong, and there's steps that the juvenile is going to take to bring themselves back into good standing in the community without having to go that extra step of an arrest or coming into court to deal with those situations. And again, the parents are involved in that situation. The victims are involved as well because they normally sign off on the station house adjustment agreements. Then there's the talk about the use of complaint summonses in lieu of complaint warrants. When we talk about the juvenile justice system, which is a quasi-criminal situation, basically all of our laws that we have for adults, they're the same as they are for juveniles, but they're adjudicated, not found guilty. We're dealing with kids, so it's not on the same level of severity when we talk about that. So when we talk about a summons versus a warrant, this is a situation where you know that a juvenile is going to be charged with something. If you charge a juvenile on a summons, that means that a juvenile will receive a copy of the complaint against them, indicating what it is that they did to violate the law, and then they will be returned to their home. Their parent can come and pick them up, or the child can be released to the parent, and then the police will come and serve them with the summons at a later point. With respect to a complaint warrant, that's a situation where a child is going to be arrested and the police and possibly the state are going to be seeking detention because the juvenile has done something that indicates that public safety or the safety of the juvenile needs to be protected by the juvenile being in an incarcerated capacity. So the use of complaint summonses is always preferred when it comes to juveniles. But again, that has to be balanced against the needs of the victim of any crime and the needs for public safety within the community. There's also the presumption against pretrial juvenile detention. With respect to juvenile detention, no juvenile can be detained without leave of court. The court has to authorize it, and there's a list of circumstances that are carefully listed within the Juvenile Justice Code that indicates when a judge should make those considerations to incarcerate a juvenile. Usually when we talk about diversion, that's not one of the tools we're talking about using in terms of pretrial detention. But we're talking about trying to do everything that's possible to avoid detention. But again, that can't always be avoided for obvious reasons. But there's also the option of post-charge diversion by prosecutors. So in the event that a police department does charge a juvenile with a crime on a complaint, whether that be through a summons or a warrant, the state, being myself or a prosecutor, can look at that complaint and determine whether or not what's in the complaint and the surrounding circumstances after a review would be more appropriately handled through the courts or more appropriately handled through some type of diversion. Going back to the station house adjustments, which is a tool that we use a lot at the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office, there are numerous situations where individuals have been charged with offenses, juveniles. We look at the complaint, we look at the discovery that goes along with it, so the police reports, the witness statements, and things of that nature, and you decide that this child may be better served by putting the child on a station house adjustment with a condition of some type of rehabilitative program. I know that in Middlesex County, my office worked hard with JDAI to come up with a diversion program that we can send certain children to from a limited number of towns within the community in Middlesex County, and have them work with counselors and other professionals who can help them get back on the right track. So a lot of times, believe it or not, putting a child on a station house adjustment and sending them to a diversion program, it can actually be a little more onerous than dealing with the courts if a kid has done something that's somewhat minimal, because they have to show up for these rehabilitative programs maybe twice or 3 times a week, or whatever the program provider deems necessary after an evaluation. Then they have to successfully complete that program. So that's definitely a tool that we use a lot, especially when we see a child who may be suffering from some type of drug addiction or problems at home, possibly learning disabilities or other things that can affect them, but they just need a little more help to get back on the right track. And that's outside of the vein of what we're talking about when it comes to biased crimes, but I just wanted to explain what the tools were in the Juvenile Justice Reform Directive with respect to diversion. So when we talk about these diversionary tactics in the vein of bias, normally a curbside warning is not going to do it. It's not going to be something that we can do in a situation where there's a bias incident that's reported. Because as the directive on bias investigations indicates, you have to investigate that matter fully. So an officer is not going to pull up to a situation and say, okay, what happened, victim? Okay, so I got your story. Okay, suspect, you tell me what happened, and then make a determination right there on the spot about whether or not a child should just be given a talking to on the scene and then it's over. You have to fully investigate all biased incidents. So when we talk about that, we're talking about, again, statements from witnesses, statements from victims, surveillance videos. There's always, when it comes to dealing with children now, something posted online that has to do with a lot of the bias incidents. So all of that has to be collected. And normally when there are bias incidents like this, something of that nature, it's reported to my office early on. As I indicated, there's a portal for the Attorney General's office where bias incidents have to be reported. It's recorded through that portal. It's funneled to the county prosecutor's office. There's a bias unit at my office. There's a agent who is here in the back of the room right now, Dr. Reginald Johnson, and there's an assistant prosecutor who review these matters that come in through the portal. Once they review the matter through the short summary that comes through the portal, they'll reach out to the police department. They'll get more information, all the police reports, all the witness statements, all the surveillance, review all of those things to determine whether or not this is a bias incident or a bias crime. If they make a determination that it is a bias crime, then a complaint is filed based on bias. If they determine that it's not a bias crime, then the file comes to me and I make a determination on whether or not there is a crime that was committed that doesn't include that extra component of bias. A lot of times what we're talking about when it comes to bias crimes, it's harassment, cyberbullying, assaults, whether it be simple assault or aggravated assault. And there's always a way to handle it from a law enforcement perspective that gives us a method of having accountability on the part of the juvenile and can comfort the victim, which I think is really important. It can be very alienating when you are a young child who's in school, who's possibly facing some bias incidents. And so being so careful with the investigation and making sure that you have contact with the victims' parents, because we're dealing with children here who, and their parents are always, it seems sometimes more affected by the incidents than the kids are, believe it or not, because they feel for their kids and they have an extra sensitivity to it because that's their child. So when a bias incident happens, it affects not just the child, it affects the entire family, even siblings of the children. So that's something that we take seriously, and they know that we do that because of the deliberative process that we get to when we're handling that case. And whether or not a bias crime is found, there is a possibility to prosecute. There is a possibility to make sure that we have something rehabilitative for the juvenile. Now, I don't really have any specifics to get into because the juvenile matters are confidential, but there's definitely that balancing act that you have to face when it comes to juvenile bias crimes, whether it be through the Attorney General Directive on Bias Investigations or on the Reform Directive.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank
That
you.
was another substantive update and information. So I really appreciate that. I myself even learned a couple of things. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to invite our co-moderator for this evening and County Superintendent Kyle Anderson, as well as over the next hour or so, also joining him are members of the Peace Committee from the South Plainfield School District, as well as youth and young adults from the community. Mr. Anderson, as you know, educators throughout New Jersey have worked very hard to ensure students are provided a safe and supportive learning environment and share the understanding that there is still more work to be done in the fight to combat youth bias. The Department of Education is committed to fostering the positive development of students by eradicating hate, bias, and intolerance in the educational setting. The Youth Bias Task Force report discusses at length the role that schools and educators play and have the potential to play in students both learning and unlearning bias. State and local policies so often task our educators with enormous responsibilities, and the recommendations in this report are definitely no exception. As Executive County Superintendent, can you speak to the programs and protocols for tackling these issues and outcomes of such?
Thank you, Erica.
Of course.
First, I would also like to welcome all of our guests. We have such a very beautiful and diverse group here. I think that we really represent what New Jersey is all about. That I share, and I believe Davis had shared regarding 85% of our teachers segregated state in the country when it comes to our classrooms. So while we may be very diverse here, there are parts of South Jersey, parts of West Jersey, parts of North Jersey. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll start over. For those of you at home, it was really good, actually. So we live in a state where we still have children of color who will never be taught by a white teacher, and we have teachers who are white who will never have the opportunity to teach a child of color, just based on where they live and their region. So we're trying to change that in the Department of Education, and we've taken these recommendations very seriously. So let's look at bias. What is bias? Bias is prejudice in favor of or against one thing, one person, or a group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. I think that we've all had some type of experience where we felt that we've been treated unfairly, but is a bias, okay? Anais Nin, who's a famous writer, says, "We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are." Okay, we are taught bias. That is learned behavior. So I'm going to go through some of the recommendations of the state, but I won't go through so comprehensive, but I will talk about some of the programs that we have that are going on. All right, so requiring comprehensive anti-bias education for students in public schools throughout the state and develop curricula support materials throughout the Department of Education. As Dr. Davis had indicated, there's what is called the Amistad curriculum. And as a part of my evaluation of all of our school districts, we do something called the QSAC, which is the Qualitative Singular Accountability Continuum. And that is the state's way of making sure that your curriculum is up to date and that your curriculum does address the curriculum of Amistad and Holocaust. And we're conducting this now. We're going into districts and we review all of their curriculum. And they have to provide proof that they are doing this. As Dr. Davis has indicated, some of our districts have been slow to implement this. And as a result, they do not get credit for that. And they strive to achieve a score of 80 on this QSAC. And so we really focus on developing all of our districts with professional development. We focus on bringing in diverse teachers and finding ways to do that, okay? So the next one is requiring anti-bias training for all teachers and school employees, including training on implicit bias, institutional bias, and structural bias. So a few years ago, we held what was known as the Equity Conference in New Jersey. And we had Dr. Tyrone Howard from UCLA come and speak to our teachers throughout the state of New Jersey. It was held at colleges in New Jersey, and we brought up statistics as Dr. Hayes, actually, Dr. Hayes, you stole all of my material beforehand, and as well as Tisha. So yes, preschool age African-American boys are 52% more likely to be suspended than their classmates. So that includes African-American girls, white girls, black girls, white girls and white boys and Hispanic boys. And why does that happen? And we have to examine that because we have implicit and complicit bias. And there are teachers that they come into their profession and they have these biases. And how do we handle that? How do we deal with that? How do we overcome that? And that comes through identification, that comes through training and professional development. There is a lot of reluctancy to that. We see at our Board of Education meetings throughout New Jersey right now that there is a lot of interest from some extremely conservative groups that are coming to our Board of Education meetings, challenging the boards to not implement learnings like Holocaust and the Amistad Bill, to not have, the famous term now is CRT, critical race theory. And when we talk about what critical race theory is, I've spent some time with Dr. Holloway at Rutgers University, and it's all about being honest with our students, teaching them accurate history. And where do we get that from? So it starts with the books that we have, and then we have to have someone teach our schools and teach our students, educate our teachers on how to implement these programs. And that is something that we do at the Department of Education. We do have an Amistad department where we will go out and educate our school districts on how to do that. So I'll move down to the next one. Address discrimination at the imposition of school discipline. So there is a harassment and bullying complaint process. That's a 10-step process that every parent should know. Now, this is harassment and bullying, but as was indicated, it has to be determined if there was bias involved in that. But it starts out with a verbal report. So all reports of HIB acts must be reported to the principal the same day the incident occurs when the school staff member or contractor or volunteer person witnesses or receives reliable information that a HIB had occurred. Then parent notification. As soon as possible following any verbal report of the HIB to the principal must inform the parents of all suspected student offenders and suspected student victims. Depending on the school's procedure and the facts of each incident, the principal might inform the parent by phone, letter, or some other form of communication. If it is appropriate to the situation, the principal may discuss the availability of counseling and other intervention services. The third step is the investigation. One school day after receiving the verbal report, the principal and the principal's designee must start an investigation of the act. The school anti-bullying specialist, as every school has a school anti-bullying specialist, conducts the investigation in coordination with the principal. The length of the investigation should be completed as possible, but must be completed no later than 10 days from the date of the written report. The principal might appoint other school staff to help with the investigation, and the principal might administer discipline or take other steps under the Board of Education's anti-bullying policy. Step 4 is the written report. Step 5 is the investigation report. Step 6, the chief school administrator's actions, okay? Impose discipline, provide intervention services, create training programs to reduce harassment and bullying, order counseling, or take other actions necessary. Step 7, the chief school administrator's report to the Board of Education. So the Board of Education has to be notified of that. And step 8 is information to the parents. Within 5 days of school, 5 school days after the results of the investigation are reported to the Board of Education, the school district must provide parents with information about the investigation that is limited to the following: the type of investigation, whether or not the district found evidence of HIB, and whether or not discipline was imposed or services were provided to address the HIB. And then step 9, optional hearing or appeal. And step 10, the Board of Education's decision. All right, there are other ways, and if the family of the victim of the HIB, if they are not satisfied with the outcome of that, then they would contact my office, which is the county superintendent's office. We have a HIB specialist there. We review the case to make sure that everything was followed and all the steps. And then if the findings we felt were just, we would go back to the parents. They could still then appeal to the Department of Education in Trenton if they wanted to do that. It's important that parents know this because when we live in a state which we do, where we have language barriers, there are a lot of families that have no advocacy for them because it's not explained to them, or their child doesn't come home and understand that something happened to them and that it was bias and that they were bullied and that they were harassed and that there is a process in which they can be protected, or at least that something could be found. So the information that could be found is all on the Department of Education's website. So if you ever need any information on harassment and bullying, you can just Google it, and in New Jersey, Department of Education, harassment and bullying, it will take you directly to the website. So that's very important for all of our parents to know that, okay? So the next step was take meaningful measures to diversify educator hiring at K through 12 and post-secondary levels by reforming certification process and New Jersey's teachers pipeline. I'm very happy to say that that is in process right now. Through COVID, there's a shortage of teachers, a shortage of substitutes as well. So we are implementing a pilot program. It was an article on it in NJ.com back on February 4th. We had a conversation about it on one of my Zoom calls this morning with the assistant commissioner. And this is a pilot program where the commissioner in all districts that apply to be a part of this pilot, they will waive one of the recommendations that perhaps maybe a teacher was just shy of the cumulative GPA that was required, or maybe there was one area of the certification of the teacher certification process that they did not meet. However, they will have a time frame. They will get the mentoring during that time frame over a period of 5 years, and they will also have that time to meet that certification. So it'll be an opportunity to bring teacher candidates in, and it'll be a great area where we can bring in teachers of bilingual background, which is an extreme shortage, special education, and as well diversity in our teaching force. So to bring Black and brown teachers into areas where they might not, because tomorrow morning I will have my roundtable with my superintendents. We address equity for the last 10 to 15 minutes of the call. We talk about recruitment of teachers of diverse background. There's a shortage of teachers that apply to those schools. Newark right now is guaranteeing, the city of Newark is guaranteeing students in school that if they major in subjects as math and science, when they graduate college, that it will be guaranteed employment in the city of Newark. Those are the bold steps that are being taken in districts that have the resources to do so. But we do have some smaller districts that don't have the resources, that need that help and need that encouragement from the Department of Education to be able to offer, if you find a candidate and he just might be shy or she just might be shy of one of the certifications, that the Department of Education is willing to waive that because a district has applied to become, to be a part of this program. So we do have Dr. Gray here, as Dr. Davis had pointed out, and he is a diversity director. All schools, we've encouraged all school districts to hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion director. Not all schools, we encourage them to do it. Not all schools have the funding for it. And sometimes in some school districts, they will do this in addition, and they will only stipend that individual. So, for example, in Woodbridge, we had Dr. Ali. He was originally stipended in addition to being department head for mathematics. So you're responsible for the entire district's mathematics development, but yet you throw this on top of that. Well, there was an appeal from the community to have a dedicated person to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and Woodbridge listened to them. And I'm glad to know that districts are finding value in that. Spoke with Dr. Bragan in Edison, same thing. He has been in a deep search for his diversity and equity inclusion director. And he is doing a program right now where he is reaching out to a community in North Edison. Potter's Crossing is a traditional African-American neighborhood in North Edison. North Edison school districts are typically high performing. However, in the area, in the demographic or the subgroup of African-American boys, they traditionally underperform. Why is it that we have children who live in a community that is only streets away from million-dollar homes, and these students in these million-dollar homes are performing at a very, very high level, and we have students that are going to those same schools that are underperforming? And that's where we have to look at our job as an educator. We have to look at how we're parenting, but how can we collaborate more with our schools, and how we can collaborate with our families, and also collaborate with our law enforcement. Fund programs for student-led anti-bias program and coordinate best practices. I am seeing that go on throughout New Jersey as we travel and talk to districts. We are having more and more workshops as we enter back into our schools. We are having more workshops where students are getting together and talking about bias. They're talking about differences, and they're talking about how they can get along better as students, and how they can accept each other's differences. So these recommendations, while we have paused some because of COVID, I'm seeing that we are moving forward in the right direction. It may not be fast enough, and there may be some roadblocks, but the Department of Education, Dr. Angelica Allen McMillan, our commissioner, is working very hard and diligently to help meet these demands of these recommendations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Would you like me to introduce next, Chris, or would you like to?
So I'm going,
Next,
right?
over to,
Where are we at? All right. So one of the groups that I do have the pleasure of working with, and they are here, and is the peace. Okay, and so one of the report's biggest assertions is that bias and racism is learned, and that it is learned not only from individual words or actions young people might observe at home or in their communities, but also in the systems, institutions, and policies to which young people are exposed. South Plainfield's Peace Committee is an acronym for positivity, empowering, and advocating for change and equity. The volunteer committee is comprised of students, teachers, administrators, a borough representative, the superintendent, and police officers. The committee is dedicated to the I'm struggling with that word today, advocacy of equity and inclusion and representation to foster safe spaces for communication and to cultivate the culture that empowers all to embrace and celebrate diversity, both in education and across the community. To what extent does the committee work together to develop attainable goals for things such as cultural awareness, curriculum, and mentorship?
Thank you so much, Mr. Anderson. Is this, okay. I'd like to just say, everyone in this room, it's humbling to be here with all the work that you're doing, and we're so grateful to have this effort in South Plainfield be highlighted here tonight. I would like to say we do this with the full support of our superintendent, Dr. Noreen Tanzi-Lishak. She is actually at a national equity conference. So with this conflicting, we're happy to be here on her behalf. But I'd like to take a moment to talk through the Peace Committee, how it was formed, and what we do as an organization in the South Plainfield Public Schools. While we were home during COVID, we knew that our students would come back very different than when they had gone home at March of 2020. And everyone kept thinking, what are the social emotional needs our students will have? How can we address that? How could we make them feel welcome in our schools? And as we really looked at the climate of our world and the issues that were stemming around us outside of our public school, it became very clear that the social emotional needs we needed to address were being ignited by a lot of the hate and a lot of the controversy around all of our kids, and no matter what was happening in their home. And so from that, our superintendent, myself, we came together to say, how can we pull our resources together to create a better space for our students to come back to? And that was really the genesis of how Peace started. From there, we opened it up and said, is anyone else on this page with us? Does anyone else feel like this is happening as well? And so many people wanted to join the efforts. So much so that when we all came together, there were so many, the idea came that we needed to break apart into subcommittees. And so everyone had a different section they were passionate about. And I brought them here so that I don't forget, but people were able to rank what they felt was the most important component for themselves. So we have a cultural consciousness, dialoguing and understanding subcommittee, an education and curriculum subcommittee, professional development subcommittee, mental health and wellness subcommittee, mentorship and representation in schools. And that's specifically Mrs. Stringer, who I'm very happy to have with me, will speak about, as that's her subcommittee as well. So we had this framework, the Peace Committee, the subcommittees, make our actionable steps. But we realized it wasn't just the Peace Committee who needed to move forward. We had a whole school district to move forward. And I'm still learning, and everyone is on a continuum of understanding and of knowing where you are in terms of how well-versed you are in what is an equitable practice. And we learned that we needed to level the playing field and offer educational resources to all of our faculty and staff. And so it began with implicit bias training, a very personal, introspective event that you need to go through to understand what are some red flags? What is setting me off? What is a trigger that I don't realize is a trigger? Why are certain students being disciplined differently than other students are being disciplined? Do I do that? Right? You need to offer a safe space for people to reflect on and identify what their role is in this. From that, we also needed to show there is evidence of structural racism, structural oppression that exists, and not everyone is aware of it. Not everyone grows up with that understanding. Not everyone takes the right classes if they don't surround themselves with different people. And so we did a book study. Excuse me. We were able to read The Color of Law, which talks about all of the different housing policies and regulations that led to, as Mr. Anderson already alluded to, a very segregated housing structure for the United States and for New Jersey. So now it was gaining traction and people were gaining understanding as to why this is important. And if our faculty doesn't represent how our students look, why is that important still, right? You're teaching a group of students. You need to understand their lived experience, and there's no excuse not to. We're in an era where you could be a fly on the wall for any podcast, any webinar, any TED Talk. And so we really wanted to set the stage for our faculty and staff to have those opportunities to build their understanding to better serve the students. And so from this, with Dr. Tanzi-Lishak's vision and support, with our Board of Education support, having Mr. Anderson there, If I started naming other names, I'm sure I'll forget people, but having our SROs and police officers there with us, we were able to open a dialogue about how to move forward. And really, having an environment where there's a democratic process for figuring out the next step and figuring out the next goal was also empowering. Not everybody gets a chance to sit at the table with a superintendent of schools. And that in itself deconstructed a lot of the hierarchy and a lot of the fear in moving forward. So that's really the framework of peace. Also, that's kind of like the cerebral stuff that we do, right? But I'm grateful to have Mrs. Strayhorn here, Amaya Rose Ransom, and Ray Pascal. So each have a specific area for what they've experienced with peace. I'm very grateful that they're here with me. And I'm seeing if I had forgot anything else, but it's a long road to shift people's mindset. But I'm very grateful to be in a community that prioritizes that. And when the wheels start turning, sometimes you just don't want to be left behind. And so more and more people are getting on board, and it's really picking up steam. But I know you have experience with the mentorship program, so I'll ask you to jump in.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dre Horn. I'm a student.
Thank you. I didn't do that. Thank you.
Again, my name is Jaretta Strayhorn. I'm a student assistance counselor in South Plainfield, and I am on the Peace Committee and the Mentor Subcommittee. I was just, as I was listening to Ms. Meliska, I was thinking about all those steps. It seems like a lifetime ago when we first started. But the Mentor Subcommittee, I'm very proud to be a part of. The way we kind of started thinking about the subcommittee was really just, during COVID, living in that pandemic and trying to educate our students during that time, it really gave us an opportunity to see our students in a different light and realizing that equity goes even beyond race. We knew the numbers of our students who received free or reduced lunch, but once you see families lined up outside of your school needing that food, it gives you a visual that you can't forget. So we really knew that at that time, after that visual, as well as the other inequities of students not having sufficient Wi-Fi in their homes when we were all virtual, students, the food insecurity, the students not having a conducive place to study. All of that became very apparent during that time. And also, as a counselor, understanding that students needed someone outside of the teacher to really be a partner with them. So that's why the mentor committee was a labor of love for me. So with that, the purpose of the mentor committee is to mentor South Plainfield students, grades 6 through 8, through positive interactions with a diverse group of adults who have had a wide range of life experiences. So when we started, there are about 5 other colleagues who are on this committee. And we were trying to find community groups that we could partner with, because we wanted, when we started talking about it, the students see us in one light. And we're teachers and they're not always loving us. So we thought someone outside of school, they may be more receptive to. So we started that process of venturing out and trying to find partnerships. We finally connected with Rutgers chapter of Collegiate 100 Men. And We have since, just to fast forward, we have since developed that partnership. We hope to start our actual mentor program with our middle school next week. So we are super excited. We're hoping the students will be super excited. But we're very excited because we feel that many of the students that we have seen, and I am, one would think that I would be on the mental health committee, but I felt that the mentoring was so important for our students to have a connection, because a lot of them lost that connection during the time that we were isolated. And with that, we are hoping that this connection will allow our students to have the freedom to talk about their anxieties, to talk about their concerns about COVID, to talk about their grief. Many of them have lost loved ones. To talk about race relations, to talk about anything that is of concern to them. So our first session starts next week, and it's going to be a game day. So, and it will be held at the middle school. And so we're hoping that this game day opens up fun dialogue, and each month we have a different topic and a session per month. We're starting off slow and small, just to kind of get our feet wet. Also, just to talk a little bit about how, COVID really changed the perspective of just education in my little cocoon of fifth and sixth graders. Just really being able to see how children were affected by not being in school. One never thought that that would be a day that we would ever see. And the students coming back have had to deal with all the things that happened in the world during that time that typically the school is able to help them deal with. Black Lives Matter, Asian hate, and COVID. And we were there as much as we could be, but it wasn't the same, and we all know that. So this year has been a real learning experience for all of us. And I think the Peace Committee really is as Ms. Meliska said, it takes time. Nothing is going to happen overnight. But I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to come together to truly help our students with the needs that need to be met outside of academics in order for them to perform academically. That makes sense?
Yes.
If children have food insecurity, and we have children who have moved and they're dealing with mental health issues, is very, very difficult to reach their full potential academically. So we're excited about our programming.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Strayhorn. And I think it was so poignant when we were, Okay, it was so poignant when Mrs. Strayhorn and I were preparing for today, her insight as a counselor and understanding that while we moved through the pandemic, our understanding of equity completely changed when you start seeing students who are not able to show the background of their screens. And when we use Chromebooks, when the extension to blur your background came, it was like a sigh of relief. Because if you have siblings, if you don't have a personal space, what are you showing? It's a lot to consider when you would come to equity. But you know what? We have our students here, which we're so grateful for. And they're each going to talk about just some concrete things they've seen come about from Peace. Our student, Ray Pascal, did come and speak to the Peace Committee. He served as one of our wonderful educators. We have students come in and teach us things all the time. And then Amaya Rose was so poignantly speaking about some of the things she experienced in the school. So they just have a few things they had wanted to include.
Great. Dr. Maya?
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Okay. Hi, my name is Amaya Rose Ransom, and I'm a freshman at South Plainfield Middle School. So, as they said, with everything going on in the past few years, life has been pretty rough. And one thing that I've noticed at our high school so far from the Peace Committee is that we have a calming room, and that calming room is very useful just because as I actually went to it yesterday and I was having a really bad day, and it really helped me just kind of relax and refocus and just kind of get my mind at a better space than it was when I walked in. And I think that having that addition to the school was really nice, just because if a student might not want to go talk to a teacher or go to the guidance counselor, just having a space where they can just be really by themselves and not have anybody ask them like any questions, I think that's really nice, because some students might not want to talk, and they might just want to be themselves, but just to figure it out on their own, but still feel like if they need to talk to someone, they can. That is really nice. And another thing I have noticed is that students' language, like their language there has been a change, because in the past few years, like when I was in Grant, I used to know that a lot of kids used to use the N-word slur a lot, and they used to think that it was just okay. And I actually had to tell some of my friends that's not right. It's a derogatory term that used to be used against and from other different races, and that's not right at all. And so I had to tell them that, and I have learned that once I did that, they did stop, because they were even some of them also educate themselves on the term and the background of it and the use, and they realized that they shouldn't be using it at all either. And so that change is happening, and that's really good. Another thing is that the administration at our school, they're very supportive. I know that I've gone to one of my teachers, I was having a bad day, I actually need to talk to them, and she was very understanding and was able to just help me and got me to go to guidance. And so I think that's another really great thing about the Peace Committee and our school as a whole. So,
Thank you, Amaya. No pressure, Ray, no pressure.
Hi, I'm Ray Pascal. I'm also a freshman at the South Plainfield High School. And by far, one of the most common things I've noticed have been teachers' use of pronouns between signing in at the end of the email, which is one of the first ones that I noticed when I started 8th grade last year. I came out in September of 2021 as transgender, so I definitely had a few specific teachers that were always by my side and supporting me. And actually, one of them is how I got to know the Peace Committee. And also, in the beginning of this year, all of my teachers and some others that I've heard of have asked students for their preferred name and pronouns. And they also asked if their parents knew about it, which I find like just amazing, because I know so many people who are also transgender, but they're afraid to come out to the parents because they're conservative or whatever. But ever since the teachers started doing this, I've noticed that a lot more students have come out as queer and transgender, which I love. And the teachers are very respectful, and there's no incidents that I've heard of regarding it. And there's also been gender neutral bathrooms, which was not available when I was in middle school. I came out when I was in 8th grade, so the only ones that were available to me were the ones in the nurses' bathrooms and the faculty bathrooms, which are closed off for students. But we were virtual during that time, so I didn't actually get to. And I noticed that some of the gender neutral bathrooms in the high school, there's 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs, so 4 altogether. And some of them are disability access as well, which is very nice. And that's probably the most concrete thing, because it's less about people and more about like what's in the building and what's available to students regardless of gender. And I've also noticed that classroom language is much more discussed and is in between cultural differences and just encouragement and respect of all the different cultures. I've noticed that's much more discussed, especially in my English and history classrooms. Although they are honors, I know that both the teachers are very like strict about it, like no saying certain things, like be respectful of all cultures and everyone. And there's been, when the time comes, there's been discussions of events like Lunar New Year, Black History Month, Diwali, Ramadan, things of all the sorts, which I've not noticed when in my younger years, between middle school, grade school, even elementary school. These are things where they're taught in depth and like who discusses it and why, who celebrates it. And this is so important because our school, Amaya, I'm sure you can agree, is very diverse. Like there are a lot of different people of races, identities, and such. So it is just amazing to see this because it feels like everyone went through an epiphany during quarantine. It's like everything hit us all at once. But instead of freaking out as people usually do, we took that and ran with it. And now we are seeing all different kinds of changes happening, which are mostly for the better. And especially for the current students who had to have consequences of racism, homophobicness, like homophobia and all that, which I have faced, and I'm sure many other people in this room have faced. It is not only important to us who have faced it, but to prevent the younger generations from ever facing it. So this is just paving the way for an amazing future in New Jersey and all throughout the country.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both. We're really proud of you. Thank you for coming.
So I just want to thank you all for that, and I'm so glad that the Peace Committee was able to come here tonight. And Dr. Noreen Lishak said she would be watching down in Tennessee, and I hope she is because she deserves a lot of credit for. She'd called me when she was putting this together. I'm glad that you brought up The Color of Law. That was a book that I had read and really shows about the foundation and the blueprint of our country and how it was developed. And there are things that we do every day or see every day that we don't realize were done based on race. And it all comes back to, because while this is equity and diversity, that is the education that we look for in our schools so that we can thwart youth bias, so that we can get rid of that and that we don't have those incidents because through education, everything changes. And so I really appreciate that. The food lines it was something that moved me. I drove to all of our districts and observed the food lines. That how much our families rely on our school district for food. And and when we have food inequities, there is bullying that goes along with that, and there's harassment that goes along with that as well. Coming back to school, the mental awareness and the awareness that your school had in order to prepare for that, because those behaviors, sexual abuse, mental abuse, all of those things were increased on a rise at home because while the children relied on our schools for food, they also relied on our schools for safety, mental breaks, counseling. All of that was through school. So, and then I also went to the calming room, and I liked it in there. I did like it in the calming room myself. So upon my visit at South Plainfield, I did ask Dr. Lishak to show me the calming room at the school. And needless to say, if I do an addition on my home, I will have a calming room. So I'm going to move on to some of our middle school students who have joined us. We have Vanessa Benson of Avenel Middle and Joshua Parks of Avenel Middle. So I'm going to ask both of you, in too many incidences, when New Jersey's children have witnessed their peers being insulted or stereotyped, either by a fellow student or by adults in their community, what has stood out to them the most was the silence of those around them. How do you feel about bullying and bias manifest themselves at school, and what is their impact on students and the school environment? I'm going to start with Vanessa because I can't see her, so I don't want to forget her. But Vanessa, what do you think about that question?
Okay, so I'm actually part of the Diversity and Equity Club at my school, AMS Allies. And I feel like a big part of the silence of the students around, actually today there was like a fight at my school. And a lot of the kids in the hallway kind of just crowded around, and nobody really went to a teacher or told anyone, including myself actually, because there were teachers that were coming around to break it up and see what was going on. And I feel like a big part of that is a lot of people are afraid to speak up if they are being bullied or if they see bullying happening or even bias. And I feel like a big part of that is we don't have enough clubs like AMS Allies, which are talking about diversity and differences. So a lot of what AMS Allies do, especially for Black History Month this month, we made posters to put around the school, and in each block, each classroom, there's a different activity. So I think it was for math classes, we were learning about African American quilt making. And then there was an activity where we made our own quilt squares and put them together. And I feel like this is helping a lot with the understanding and recognizing that there's a lot of different people around us who come from different backgrounds, even if it may not be on the surface. So I feel like AMS Allies, it's student run. We do have 3 coordinators who make a lot of the plans happen, but it is student-based every meeting. It's what are your ideas? What do you want to see changed? We actually had a question. We had 2 weeks to answer it. And when we came back to the next meeting, we were all supposed to have 1 or 2 ideas. How could we improve our school mentally, physically, socially? And the club is made up of 6th through 8th graders, and everyone had at least 1 to 2 ideas, which may not seem like a lot, but there are about 15 of us in the club, and a lot of them were really great ideas, like a calming room or a yoga room, because a lot of kids are afraid to go to guidance or ask their teachers. As someone who goes to guidance a lot, it is nice to have a resource, but a lot of kids are afraid to speak up and ask for that. So I do feel like clubs who are teaching things like how to recognize and appreciate diversity is very important, because not only the people who, like as students who are creating the activities, we are learning in the process. In June, we're gonna have this big project for the club where we're gonna set it up in our cafetorium, and it's gonna be different countries around the world. So each member of the club is going to be designated a country to learn about, and maybe if you are from that country or someone of that background, you could bring them in to talk about who they are, where they're from, and their backgrounds, and maybe even like if you are like of the ethnicity, you could wear traditional clothing or sing a traditional song, just to. It's actually a really cute project. Everyone has a passport. They come around. They learn about the country. They get it stamped. And in the end, not only are the club members learning, but the students who are participating are also learning. So to circle back, I think it is really important to recognize differences in diversity, not only of race and ethnicity, but of gender and sexual orientation as well. Thank you.
Wow. So I didn't know how our middle schoolers would do, because I would think they would be kind of shy, but you're doing wonderful. So I'm going to move on to a young man who I was so surprised when I saw his name. I wasn't surprised, I was pleased. So Joshua Parks is also a student at Avenel Middle School. He happens to be a very good athlete in a football program that I run. And so it was nice to see his name on there. And Josh, do you want me to read the question again so that you can, or do you want to speak off of where Vanessa left off?
Can you read the question again, please?
Okay, sure. This is like when we do the spelling bee contest. Can you repeat that question, please, right? Okay. In too many instances, when New Jersey's children have witnessed their peers being insulted or stereotyped, either by fellow students or by adults in their community, what has stood out to them the most was the silence around them. How do you feel about bullying and bias manifest themselves at school, and what is their impact on students and the school environment?
Well, personally speaking, I don't actually agree with bullying or being biased in our school. Some of the students who get bullied, they might not go to a teacher because they consider that as being weak. Because like in this generation, people think that going to get help from somebody, a teacher, or even complaining to a friend, they think that they'll get bullied even more, being made fun of. And actually, I was talking to a guidance counselor earlier today, and she brought up the idea of doing stuff where it's like, where it's more anonymous going to guidance, because in the classroom, some students might not want to raise their hand and ask if they can go to guidance because, I mean, personally speaking, I've had to go to guidance before, and that's like really embarrassing. But for
We got a counselor here.
At my school, we also have the club Sidekicks or Heroes and Cool Kids, and we actually go to elementary schools and we teach students who are in 4th grade about how to make better life decisions, being more inclusive, and how to show more how to show more equality towards other students. And our last lesson was about empathy. We were teaching them how to like show respect, and how even if you're in a situation, you might want to treat somebody the way you want to be treated, because you don't know what they're going through outside of school or inside their house. And our next lesson is actually going to be about being more inclusive with people in different genders, because in the classroom there is like a few different people who are gender neutral, and yeah, it starts at a young age, and we were teaching them like not to grow up hating or other things that would be like not helpful to the society. And at our school currently, we are trying to come up with something else to teach the kids at a young age, so when they grow up they won't make bad decisions, because it's better to start young than to teach somebody when they're like in middle school or high school and they've already had the idea that they had in their mind set in stone.
Wow. Josh, I'm very proud of you. All right. And a few years ago, Josh was thrown into the role because of an injury to another player. He had to be thrown into the role to be the team quarterback. And I remember spending some time with you on the sideline and told you had all of the skills, and you just had to believe in yourself. And you have the makings of a true leader, and as you do, Vanessa and Maya and Ray, you guys all have great leadership skills. I'm so glad that when Erica and I were talking, we knew that we needed that youth input to this conversation, because we can be a lot of adults just talking about what we think you need, but when we hear it from you and all of you, it tells us that we are either on the right track or we need to pivot and do something. And right now, I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged that we can have that kind of dialogue, and that there are students like yourselves that are not afraid to speak. And I understand, Vanessa, what it's like to be afraid to stick up for someone. All right? I've been in that situation. I've been in the situation where I've been afraid to stick up for someone, and I've been in a situation when no one stuck up for me. all right? And it's not it's a scary situation. But when the groups get together and learn more, and they're encouraged that they can stick up for each other, when more people stick up instead of getting their cell phones out and trying to videotape good footage of a fight or something like that, it's nice to see a young person step in and say, stop it, knock it off. So I'm going to move on to another person who I know and has agreed to come here and speak, and her name is Victoria Birch. She is described as a young adult. I like that, young adult. Young adult, okay. I miss those days. Victoria, an estimated 2.7 million adolescents who are lesbian, gay, or bisexual live in the United States. Other youth identify themselves as transgender, intersex, two-spirit, questioning, or use other terms. These youth frequently encounter numerous challenges and may feel isolated, alienated, depressed, and fearful as they attempt to navigate their emerging awareness of their sexual and/or gender identity. Have you faced bias as a member of this community, and if so, what recommendations or strategies do you feel may help develop an understanding of how LGBTQI plus identities are perceived within the community, so we can better acknowledge and change the role our institutions and systems play in teaching and perpetuating bias?
I'm Victoria Birch. It's been so lovely to hear everyone speak about all the great work that you guys have been doing. I'm a member of the Woodbridge Organization of Neighbors Advocating Change. That's one of the ways that I've been able to connect with my community, and so many of us from so many different backgrounds are able to get together and work on what we see needs to get done, very similarly to peace, just not centered around a school or a district, rather. It's just a smattering of neighbors getting together, trying to advocate change. It's a very comprehensive name. So in terms of an LGBTQIA plus lens, for the ease of speaking, I'm going to say queer as an umbrella term. That includes sexual orientations and differing gender identities. Please take no offense to it all. I personally, as I can only truly speak from my own experience, didn't face much of it in my school upbringing. That's because I didn't realize it until college. So I lucked out there. But for so many kids in our school districts, as we're all far more than aware of, it's not as easy if you fit this stereotype or you have this characteristic, or if you don't and you just mirror some things. It can be very difficult for children to handle those social situations. Either you are someone in the queer community, like the question poses, trying to learn more about yourself, what support networks are out there for you. It could be your friends, it could be your school, it could be your family, but a lot of times those three avenues are very difficult to access, especially if it's difficult for you yourself to come to terms with what that may mean for you in your future. Or you are someone who is interacting with someone who belongs to the queer community. And if you yourself haven't been thinking of these questions or questioning any of what has been thought of pertaining to how you present yourself, it can be very difficult to initiate those conversations with other members of the queer community. especially if you don't already establish those connections from any other base point. In terms of schooling, I didn't receive any gay education whatsoever. I'm sure that is hopefully changing, but in terms of history, I am not sure if it's possible that I may be forgetting the fact that being gay was cause for being taken to, I'm trying not to be vulgar, being involved in the Holocaust. We learn about the Red Scare, but we don't learn about the Lavender Scare, along with McCarthyism. We didn't learn about the Stonewall riots and how none of the progress that we've seen as a queer community could have been done without the leadership of Black, queer, women-presenting people. So there's a lot to make up for in the curriculum. But again, this is also an issue with everything that we're seeing of, well, the kids just need to be taught more. How much more can you teach these children, and how much more can you force educators to teach? So I'm very happy to hear about all the different support networks that and support materials that you're trying to provide for educators, because that's another concern. You have this qualification of maths, reading, sciences, and on top of all of that, oh, also raise our children, please, and teach them how to be good people. So I have the highest empathy for educators and all the difficult work that you guys are doing here. In terms of counseling, God bless. I feel for you, and thank you so much for the work you're doing. So in terms of the education system, that's one thing. In terms of familial connections, schools being, as the report lays out, such a fundamental part of what shapes young people's minds. Schools providing any resources that can help young people begin to have the conversations with their families about questioning either their sexuality or their gender expression. That's very rare. Hopefully it's becoming more and more commonplace. And friends, when children are beginning to learn things about themselves, and it starts at such a young age, obviously not an engagement in and acting upon those things, those don't come until later, but when you know, and educators have such an important role in seeing the interactions that happen between children. It's very easy, like if you see children's onesies that are like, oh, he's a heartbreaker, well, that's an infant. Like, so the roles that are put on children are very easy to be seen, and dismantling those roles that we expect of children is very important, so that a child is able to express themselves as like a genuine expression of who they are, regardless of what is expected of them. So educators have a crucial role in seeing how those differing characteristics interact within classrooms, playgrounds, lunchrooms, clubs, all of that. So being able to provide support and also being a lens to be able to watch and observe the different interactions that can be taking place inside of classrooms is very important. To be able to possibly lend an ear or provide advice of like, hey, here are some options for you. In a completely different regard, and one that I'm not sure if this is the most direct way to get such a point across, but in addition to the history that I was not taught, Also, sexuality and gender expression when you are in grade school and you are split up by two genders, as if that is the dichotomy that actually exists. And then you are given health conversations, and all the girls are in one room and all of the boys are in another. Again, I haven't had that since the early 2000s. It was very nice to be called a young adult earlier. I haven't had that conversation in a very long time, so hopefully it is different. But I was told, oh, you have these characteristics, that means this is what's happening to you, and this is what your future is going to be like on the basis of your body. We weren't taught about anybody else. I wasn't taught about any other body's anatomy, I think, until high school, possibly. And then in the 28-day health class that we get, the 28 minutes that's spent on sexual health definitely didn't cover anything of like, there are more relationships than simply heterosexual relationships. And here are some things that you can know, and here are some ways to be safe in any regard, right? So while I haven't explicitly been called any slurs in school and I wasn't ostracized in any way, as I'm sure so many of us sitting here have been sitting in a classroom and go, oh, that's just not what it's like. That's not how I feel, and why isn't this talked about? It's true for most other communities. The intersections as well between race, gender, sexuality, physical ability, mental ability, all of that, piecing it together is another big struggle for educators, and I'm just extremely grateful for all of the work that you guys have been doing. So I hope any of my words have been able to shine some light on additional issues that I can't wait to add to your task list. So, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Victoria. I think that you did touch on quite a few things where we've had such separatism. And before my children's school was completely redone, still existed were the boys' entrance and the girls' entrance of the school. And when people wonder why we have HBCUs or why our churches, if we're all, under one God, and why our churches are segregated the way they are. I actually met with a teacher who was an American Black, and she went to the church because her son was a school in school there, and it was just it was St. John Vianney in Colonia. And people would always come up to them and ask them, what country are you from? And she says, I'm from New Brunswick. But they would ask them that always because they didn't understand why they would come to a Catholic church. And you must be from Africa, where Catholicism is very strong, and and she'd say, no. So our biases are innate, not innate, they are learned. But we pass them down to our children, and we say them and don't realize what we're saying to that person, that you're not welcome here. You're not welcome here, and you must be foreign because you're in the wrong place. So I'm going to pass on to my counterpart, Erica, so we can have our final thoughts.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you all again for coming out and speaking. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, guys. I'm biased towards the in-person here. I completely forgot about our virtual guests. Thank you for that indication in the back of the room. Detective Rodriguez, can you hear me? Coming off mute. I see him moving.
I think he's still muted.
There he goes. Oh, we. We can't, can you hear us?
You can hear us, we can't hear him.
There we go, now we can hear you.
All right.
Okay, I'm gonna do from the high school to this little speech, but I'm Detective 103 at the Ventura Police Department. I just want to thank the prosecutor's office for inviting us to participate. I want to say hi to the people from the HOC and the Board of
Education in Cerebral. And my job is basically to investigate issues with bias. I've been doing this for a long time, over 12 years. And it's something that's a concern in all communities, something that has to be addressed, and it has to be handled in a certain manner so that things don't expand to the point that it becomes an issue in our communities. I'm going to give now the opportunity to Josh Gorzniak, who is our student rep. He's a senior. This is the second time I get invited to be part of the panel, and he was here last year. He's a senior. He's going to be graduating, so I'm going to give him the rest of the time to do his part. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. My name is Josh. I am a senior, as I said, at Cerebral War Memorial High School. And just I'd like to thank you all for giving me the platform to talk. And yeah, as mentioned before, we live in New Jersey, which is a pretty exciting and diverse place. You know, there are states and even counties outside of our state where, you know, you don't see as many diverse people walking around our hallways or our various other towns and so on. So I feel like we're in a very unique position and in a very progressive and exciting position too. At the same time though, I like to kind of bring forward that 85% statistic that was mentioned earlier. You know, like 85% of our teachers are all, you know, white teachers, and there are very few teachers of color within our buildings too. And, you know, that's just a statistic, like even from my own perspectives, you know. I'm a senior, and this year was the first year that I had a teacher of color, an African-American teacher, in all my 12 years of being at Cerebral. So that is quite, you know, quite the astounding kind of fact. And yeah, that's definitely something we should kind of work on. But then at the same time, there are steps and strides forward too, which I would like to comment on, both at the administrative level and even on a more grassroots student-run level as well. I guess the biggest advancement and progression our kind of school made was just recognizing and acknowledging various, I guess, various celebrations and other holidays from other kind of religions and ethnicities. We, for the first time, we honored Eid, which was a Muslim sort of holiday, kind of celebrating Ramadan and ending Ramadan. We honored that for the first time last year, and we sort of gave students a day off for that. So we accounted for other kind of ethnicities and diversities, and that was kind of a major leap forward. And as mentioned before, we have other more student-run kind of aspects. As was mentioned, February is Black History Month, and to kind of spread that news and to kind of increase diversity too, the History Club has been airing kind of segments, video segments celebrating past Black Americans and African Americans who have made great leaps and strides forward, not only in ensuring diversity and ensuring equity, but also in, you know, the STEM fields and in other disciplines as well. And then even from our Cerebral Human Relations Commission, for this month, we'll be hosting a Black History Month speaker event, particularly with a focus on sort of African Americans in the STEM field too. And that will be held on February 24th. We encourage all of you to come in. We have been circulating flyers, and yeah, it'll be a virtual Zoom meeting. And then just one more kind of campaign/movement is, of course, our very own school's International Society. It's been a club that's been running for the past, I guess, 10 years now, so quite some time. And the main focus is just to kind of spread awareness of cultures and various different countries from around the globe. We hold meetings every single month with a focus on a different country each month. For instance, this past week, even we did kind of a meeting on Ukraine. We've done meetings on South Africa and various other countries. So that's definitely also a very unique experience to, you know, get to know with different cultures, experience the food, the traditions, the dances, the music, and etc. So I think with all these combined efforts, whether it be through kind of administrative action in terms of laws, but also more kind of student-run focus and more student kind of action, we can sort of achieve a greater diversity and equity and greater acceptance, and thus eliminate biases. Thank you.
Wow, John.
Yeah. That's our closing. That was a perfect closing, Josh. Thank you. We have coming up on the screen for those that are joining in live, and then I'll share it here also. The 2022 Educators Summit in collaboration with the Educational Services Commission of New Jersey and the Prosecutor's Office is coming up on February 23rd. And we also have the contact information that we welcome and encourage you to join in future roundtable events to better understand the problem of interpersonal and systemic bias among our young people and set forth comprehensive solutions to address it. We ask, please submit written comments, join in the conversation live, or otherwise follow up with the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office to ensure that your voice is heard. And again, I just want to thank all of the panelists for joining us tonight and sharing your perspectives, your lived experience, and some of the things that you all are doing to combat youth bias. And I just, again, I believe it was Ames Allies. I think I got that.
AMS.
AMS, okay.
Avenel Middle School.
Okay, there we go. That makes sense. And the Peace Committee for demonstrating a model that brings together different groups. It has community voice, youth voice, educators, and a litany of other groups, because so oftentimes I think decisions are made continued in silos. And so I really commend you for bringing that to the forefront in how you actually took those committees forward through a collaborative approach. I think that speaks volume about the initiatives that you're taking on. So that's it for me. I don't know if you have any closing remarks.
I just want to thank all of the panelists as well. I would like to as well thank their superintendents, Dr. Labby, also Detective Rodriguez for being here, Dr. Massimino in Woodbridge, also the Diversity and Equity Inclusion Coordinator there is Mr. Ali, and Principal Mr. Short from Avenel Middle School, and of course Dr. Leshak at South Plainfield for sharing their stars from their school and the stars from their administration and faculty. I just think that as a county, I'd like to also acknowledge some of the members that we have our prosecutor, Yolanda Sacconi, our first prosecutor, Mr. Chris Kubride, and agent Dr. Johnson, Dr. Reggie Johnson in the back of the room. I just want to encourage our entire county to continue this conversation. I thank the prosecutor's office for putting this together and wanting to coordinate with the schools in Middlesex County to just keep the conversation going and just pushing the envelope as far as we can in this discussion, because it's being comfortable. We have to get comfortable having that uncomfortable conversation.
And can we take a vote to have some youth moderators at the next event? I think they do wonderfully. I pitched that for a vote.
Bring Mr. Cooper right up. Green light on, just press it.
There we go.
There you go.
Thank you. As Mr. Anderson said, my name is Christopher Kubright, and I'm the first assistant prosecutor at the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office. And on behalf of Prosecutor Yolanda Ciccone, I just would like to thank everyone who has participated this evening, especially all of our young people, and engaging in the thought-provoking conversation that we've had and the programs that are taking place in the various districts throughout our county. The professionals that gave of their time tonight to come and to present the programs that are taking place. Most importantly, I'd like to thank our co-moderators, Kyle Anderson, our executive superintendent of Middlesex County Schools, and Erica Hine from the JDAI, more specifically the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, operating here in the state of New Jersey and, quite frankly, around the country to reduce youth incarceration throughout the country, and more importantly, the impact that it's had in Middlesex County has been extraordinary. Last week, we were here across the hall in a alternative community outreach program. We were discussing extreme risk protection order. It's a way that we battle gun violence and harm that takes place in the home through possession of guns and in our community. What I think was an outstanding program that we can reach out to our community and to continue the conversations in so many different arenas. I know we're going to be out at the Education Commission on the 23rd to discuss school violence symposium, school safety symposium. So we, Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office or the Education Commission to find out some more details in that regard. And more importantly, any topic that you would like to have discussed in the law enforcement arena or the discussions that we've had tonight regarding youth bias, the event. So please just contact us and at the prosecutor's office on the website, and any upcoming outreach programs that you'd like to see. Be more than happy to put those together. So again, thank you all, and we appreciate you coming out tonight.